Hello, good evening. Hi there. My name's Heather James. I'm the Manager of Planning and Development for the Town of Aylmer, and I would just like to welcome you to the Town of Aylmer Settlement Area Boundary Expansion Public Engagement Session number 1. The town has retained Santec Consulting Limited to assist the town in the assessment of potential parcels for including into the town's anticipated corporate and settlement area boundary expansion. Joining us tonight virtually from Stantec is Eric Bays and Sharon Lynn. Also joining us tonight in person is Owen Yeager, Director of Legislative Services and Clerk for the Town of Aylmer, as well as Andy Grizel, our CIO from the town, as well as council members from the Town of Aylmer. We kindly request that before leaving the session tonight that you sign our public registry so that we may be able to keep you informed of any future public engagement sessions. For our online participants, if you could please email myself, Heather James, at hjames@town.aylmer.on.ca, and I will add you to our circulation list for future public engagement sessions. This project is currently in phase 2, which is developing the parcel scoring methodology, which includes this engagement session, to receive your feedback, as well as from the public and property owners. The purpose of this meeting tonight is to review the drafted scoring mechanism that will be used in later project phases to assess potential parcels for inclusion in the town's boundary. The categories, criterion, scoring will be introduced through a presentation from staff from Stantec with a question and answer period following the presentation. For the question and answer period, we would first take questions from online participants and then take questions from in-person participants. Eric and Sharon will moderate the online portion of the meeting. Owen and I will moderate the in-person portion of the meeting. We kindly ask that you limit your questions to 1 question for the sake of time. If we have additional time at the end, we will be able to take on more questions. Eric, can you please proceed with the presentation? Thank you.
Wonderful, and thank you very much for that, Heather. Hello, everyone. My name's Eric Bays. I'm a planner with Stantec. Stantec has offices across Southern Ontario, across all of Ontario, actually. The closest one that we have to Aylmer today is actually just up in London, which is where my colleague Sharon is. Sharon's going to be taking notes, making sure that we've got records of what we've talked about, and we do want to hear your feedback on this. The feedback that we get back from you is something that's going to help us tailor this scoring tool that we're trying to develop. But we also want to hear, try and see if we can answer some questions about the project in general. There might be planning related questions, so welcome those as well. Like Heather mentioned, there's we'll step through the project background, how we got to this point, the policy context, sort of what are the other documents, the other policy that we've got to make sure that we follow that are part of Ontario's land use planning framework. Then we're going to step through the scoring mechanisms, how the scoring lays out and our thinking behind those. Then we want to hand it over to you for an opportunity to hear what questions you might have, what feedback you might have on them. As Heather mentioned, we may not be able to get to all of the questions this evening, but we do have, if we can get your email addresses, we welcome any feedback offline. If it's something that you like to consider a little bit more and provide maybe a more fulsome discussion of your thoughts, we want to hear back that way as well. So anything that is shared to the town is also shared to us, and we take those things to heart. So in terms of the project background, this is really kind of our Stantec's strategy for this. So the first part of it was really project launch and identifying existing conditions, making sure we've got all of the information before we really start. We're right now at the second stage, and that's developing this parcel scoring method or tool. Once we have this meeting, we get this feedback, we'll refine it out based on the type of discussion we have in that feedback. Then we'll go on to actual candidate parcel assessment. So I do want to be clear, today we're not looking at parcels today. We actually even haven't started producing maps that identify parcels. And that's really because we want to focus the discussion today on more of a higher level discussion. How, if we're thinking about adding lands to the town, what are the different things that are important for those parcels? And then, so the next stage would be identifying candidate parcels and then using the scoring mechanism. And then finally, there's the recommending parcels, and there'll be discussions with Malahide Township as well, because all of the land that we're looking at is currently within the township. I'll just go very quickly through the policy context. What are the other pieces of this kind of planning and land use puzzle that we're working on? What's the information that we're really using as the basis here? So the first two are the provincial policy statement and the provincial planning statement. I list both of them, even though the planning statement isn't in effect right now, because it's going to replace the provincial policy statement. And this is really guidelines, they're very high level guidelines, but they're guidelines from the province on how settlement areas, how communities should be built to make sure that they're sustainable, compact, mixed use, to make sure that there is proper investment in infrastructure, in public service facilities, to make sure that land use decisions don't cause public health concerns and avoid natural features and environmental hazards. The next one is the County of Elgin official plan. The County of Elgin official plan was approved in 2015. There's currently a new official plan that's being drafted by the county. It also is not in effect yet, but it is going to reflect some of the other studies that we're going to talk about below. So it's just an update. These happen on a regular basis to make sure that municipalities are keeping abreast of different changes that are happening and they're responding to different needs and challenges. And then the final one is the town of Aylmer's official plan, which guides how the town itself is to develop, what type of priorities there are, and how the physical development of the town is to unfold. From background studies, there's been a few of them over years. The first one was a 2016 Aylmer land needs study, and this was based on demographic data at that time. The next one that came after was in 2022. This was prepared by the county, and it was about population and employment forecasts, and then which were then taken and then turned into land needs. So basically what the county did is they looked at what type of population growth are we expecting over the planning time horizon. That's usually 20 to 30 years. And then they determined, okay, we expect that it's going to be allocated between different towns and townships, settlement areas in a certain manner. It's usually based on how quickly different places have grown in the past. And then they take a look at where there is vacant land that's already within the settlement boundary and how much of that population growth can be accommodated there. And then if there is a difference or a shortfall, then they make recommendations for where settlement areas might need to have their boundaries expanded, shuffled, or adjusted. So Elgin County prepared this study back in 2022. The town of Aylmer, based on those recommendations, prepared their own growth projection update in 2024. And that's the most recent document we're working from. We've considered all of them together. So I just want to give you an idea of what we've started this project with. So the town of Aylmer's growth projection update from earlier this year, it recommends that there needs to be about 28 gross hectares of additional residential land residential uses and 12 gross hectares of employment land. So 40, there's a shortfall in the community of 40 gross hectares of land. There's a few different assumptions, like all planning, that go into that. But they're, from my review, they're fairly robust assumptions. So the gross land, you can't build homes across the entirety. You need streets, you need parks, you need stormwater ponds, and other different facilities that help make complete, comprehensive communities. So about only about 55% or a little over half of the land in most communities is actually for residential. The rest is taken up by this other supporting infrastructure. Out of that, the estimate that was used is there'd be about 27 houses per net hectare. So that would be similar to some of the newer communities that you're seeing that are being built, lots of, about 100 feet deep. And, you're talking about singles on, say, lots of 40 feet wide, semis, townhouses, trying to get a combination of those in, but it would average out to about 27 units per net hectare. And then the calculation for that 12 hectares of employment land, it assumed about 10% vacancy factor that was applied. And that's just because, again, just like the residential ones, you need roads. There's sometimes some inefficiency from laying out streets and things as well that comes from that. I just wanted to, and Heather, apologize, this wasn't in the draft I sent to you, but I wanted to put this in here just to explain what that number was. So this is the population number. So we expect that there is a need for an additional 1,000. Sorry, by we, I mean Watson Associates, who is the other planning and demographics company that did the study in 2024. They expected that there needs to be between now and 2048 an extra 1,250 homes in Aylmer. And then this is sort of the step by step how it got translated into the land area. So the estimate was, well, about 190 units could be accommodated in the existing built-up area. So this would be somebody with a large lot, say splitting it in half and building a house on one side of it, say secondary units, garden suites, those trying to make better use of these land inside the built-up area. So that's netted out. We get this 1,060. This is residential dwellings that are actually being proposed already through that process. And then this is residential unit potential on the already empty or vacant land where there isn't a plan for a subdivision, but it's just land within the town of Aylmer that's vacant that could be used to accommodate housing. So that leaves us with a shortage of about 440 homes. Which if you use that calculation we looked at the last page of 27 homes per net hectare, that would give you a need for 16 hectares, but because we need streets, we need parks, schools, storm ponds, that works out to the 28 that we have here. So I just wanted to be transparent about how did we get this number, or why did we pick this number, and this is where it comes from. And at that, I'll introduce the scoring tool. So the scoring tool we've tried to develop really is to help us compare apples to apples. There's a number of different parcels and different directions that the town could expand. And, as opposed to, perhaps myself and Sharon working with other people to sort of just circle blobs on the map and then go, we think these are good. Is there some way we can add a little bit of objectiveness to it? Now, I want to say this isn't a be all end all. Once we go through the scoring method, and there are these scores that are developed for different parcels, it doesn't mean if you're in the top score, you're there's no doubt, or perhaps if you score lower, you're out of luck. That's not what we're trying to do here, but it is trying to help us gauge a little bit better, that some sites have some benefits, some will have some, but they'll have some drawbacks. And how do you sort of balance and measure those? So it's about trying to be transparent about what that initial scoring or what that initial information was. But there's other things that are going to come into this. And that's why we do want to have your feedback here, as well as once we go through that scoring, we identify candidate parcels. We want to hear your feedback on that as well. We did separate or divide out some portions. So these are lands that we're not looking or we're not considering. And these really come from the provincial planning statement. They're generally, they're good planning, but it's also there's a provincial kind of direction. So the parcels we're going to be looking at, when they're all compiled together, they have to be a logical extension of the town of Aylmer. We can't just create a blob with farmland in between. It needs to be on the edge or abutting up against the existing community. We can't consider specialty crop areas. So specialty crop areas are different from prime agricultural land, and number 4 is prime agricultural land. So I can talk a little bit about why those are different. The other one is mineral aggregate resources. So sand, gravel, crushed stone. These lands, that type of resource is a non-renewable resource. If you build on top of it, you can't get to the gravel and the sand that's underneath it, and then you have to go somewhere else to go and get it. That adds on to the cost of transporting it, which is a pretty significant part of it. So there's direction from the province, from a bunch of different acts, saying where there's mineral aggregate resources that exist, whether they're being extracted now or they could be in the future, we need to protect those. And we need to protect them in 2 ways. One is we can't build directly on top of them because that's going to sterilize the resource. But there also needs to be setbacks around them, because nobody wants to move into a house and then somebody starts a quarry next door, and then that quarry's operation ends up having to be reduced or is impeded by the homes next door because they don't match as land uses. And then prime agricultural lands, oftentimes you try to avoid prime agricultural lands because it's some of the best agricultural soil that there is Canada Land Index, CLI 1, 2, and 3 are considered prime agricultural lands in Ontario. Elgin County is blessed with an incredible agricultural land, and effectively the entire area around Aylmer is considered Class 1. Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 agricultural land. So we are still going to have to consider those lands. It will be a factor, but we expect that there will be some expansion, and that will affect prime agricultural lands. We are going to try our best to avoid them if it's possible. And then the final piece here is minimum distance separation. So making sure that that expansion or those new community areas aren't disrupting existing farms and their operations. So we broke it down into 3 sections. And the key right now, at least, we'll get into more detail on these, is the leftmost column. So we broke it down into 3 sections. There's transportation, there's integration with the community, or how these lands can integrate into the existing community, and the other one is engineering. How challenging would it be to get water, wastewater, and to provide stormwater infrastructure? Altogether, these 4 categories: transportation would be a score of 14, integration is 41, engineering is 24. I recognize that some of them look like odd numbers. It just happened to be how it fell. We can talk more about about that as well, but we'll go through each one of those. So I'll start with transportation. Transportation is really looking at the roads that the sites are around and seeing is their actual capacity to support this type of development. We want to make sure that one of the things we consider is if we've got roads that are close to capacity already, or that they're already quite busy, maybe it makes sense for us to limit how much more development is along those roads. So these are based on, it's a volume to capacity ratio. So just how much capacity can the road actually move versus how much it is actually being used. So it's always going to be a number less than 1 because you can't move more vehicles than the road is designed to move. Fortunately, in Aylmer, most of the roads out in the periphery are well below capacity. They may be busy at certain times of day, but they can still move the amount of traffic. So the scoring, we're not seeing in the town of Aylmer or in Malahide surrounding the town anywhere that's meeting capacity, that's approaching capacity. So our scoring has been stretched down a little to take a look at things like 0 to 0.4, 0.4 to 0.6, 0.6 to 0.75 or 3/4. The next one is the community integration. There's actually 3 slides here. I'll move through this a bit quicker, but we can come back to these slides when you have questions or if you want to take a further look at them. One is accessibility from roads. So do the parcels have direct access onto a public road? Obviously, if you want to extend the street network, it's much easier to do that if you're already up against an existing street. So the criteria here are just how many streets does it have? Does it abut up against? The next one is distance or access to existing or planned retail commercial focus. So this is making sure that people will be reasonably close to where there's shops and there's services, and make sure that the new development can help build and help support those existing commercial and retail areas. So the average for all of Aylmer right now is about 1 kilometer. We're using the intersection of John and Talbot as the core or the commercial core of the community. Certainly there is an opportunity, and you see it in many other communities, where you have commercial that extends out on the edge of the city, power centers, big box stores, more service commercial. But for now, we're looking at least at where do we have the established core? Again, that's an average about a kilometer. As you can see from the scoring, the closer you get, or the smaller that distance is, the higher the score. Distance community facilities is another important factor. So this is making sure that people have access to recreational facilities, libraries, other types of infrastructure like that. The average that we're seeing in the town right now is about 2 kilometers. So our scoring again reflects the closer that you are, the higher the scoring would be. The other one is education facility. Now, this one here, we had a bit of discussion internally on this, because with the amount of homes coming in, it's quite possible that there may be a need for a new school. That's outside of our control. That's something that the school boards oversee, and they are, through any type of development in the future, they're informed on that, and they crunch their numbers on demographics to figure out, do they need to build a new school? Do they need to add on to other ones? I know nobody likes portable classrooms, but do they need to do that on an interim kind of basis? So currently right now, the average is actually only 0.75 kilometers or 750 meters, which is actually quite good. That's about a 10-minute walk. So is taking into consideration that there may be an opportunity for new schools to be built to house the needs of the new communities, but also that people may end up using these existing schools either if there's some rounding out. So taking that into consideration as one of the scores too. The other ones here are distance to emergency services. So what's the distance to police services, to ambulance and to fire? And that's really making sure that we're considering emergency response in this and making sure that we're not putting undue pressure on emergency services to change their operations or to accommodate new growth. So what we've done is we've taken what would be the distance each one to fire, ambulance, and police, add those together and divide by 3 to get an average. So the current average, again, in the town is about 1 kilometer. The scoring here, the closer it is, the better the score. Connectivity to community here is really about the ability in the future to make the new communities that are built tie in with the existing communities. So are there road stubs that could be an extension of a road instead of having big barriers where people have to walk very far to get from, say, one street that's currently in Aylmer to another street? They might share backyards, but if you have to walk several kilometers, you're probably not going to walk it. You're probably going to drive it. And this is one of those things about community connectivity, trying to see if we can build a tight transportation network that allows people to choose whether they want to drive, bike, or walk. So again, this one here is a bit of a, I'll call it subjective, though we've tried to attach some numbers to it. And it really comes down to how many barriers there are. Are there barriers in different directions? Accessibility to community facilities. This one really talks to actual sidewalk infrastructure. So there's already a network of sidewalks in Aylmer. There's plans to extend that network within the existing community over time. So trying to figure out, are there places where there's already sidewalks and they just need to be carried on into the new community? Or are there places where there's planned to be sidewalks that can carry on? And very similar to this is the trail network, and seeing, is there a way to extend multi-use trails or those recreational trails that pass through the town that are for cycling and bicycles? And is there a benefit or is there a potential for us to extend that network to tie the new community in with the existing network? Finally, these are some binary features that we're considering. One is minimum distance separation formula. So these are calculations that are used to make sure that when you have farming operations, specifically livestock operations, that you're providing enough distance from that to dwellings to make sure that new residents aren't complaining about farm operations that were already there. The other one is conflicting land uses. So this is talking, like we talked about before, is it in prime agricultural areas or not? We may not be able to avoid those here just because the soil in Aylmer and around Aylmer is of such good quality. But it is one of the features that we're thinking about. Another is conflicting land uses. So making sure that there's separation from these lands to industrial lands or to certainly landfills. And then the last is thinking about, again, conflicting land uses, and that's conservation regulated areas. So these would be areas that are into the 1 to 100 floodplain, are water courses that need setbacks around them to protect the natural features and also protect health and safety. And this is the final of the criteria, I promise, and then we can open it up to discussion. But this is related to the engineering criteria. And it's really talking about how challenging is it going to be to get these pipes and to get this infrastructure out to the community based on Aylmer's current infrastructure and plans to improve their infrastructure. So I guess going from the most challenging would be there's a need for major upgrades, major expansion to something like a pump station or the distribution system to service that land, all the way ranging to there's already capacity available in the pipes that are nearby, and there's little to no investment that's actually needed. It's in the best case, it's literally you can extend a pipe out, and there's enough capacity in the pipes downstream to service. For wastewater, similar. If there you can't. All wastewater runs by gravity to the water treatment plant. There's certain communities that have pump stations just because the distance and the land, the topography means that you actually have sewage effluent that runs down. It's collected in reservoirs and then it's actually pumped, and it's pumped to the water treatment plant. So it is a feature. It is a design solution. It's not an ideal one. It's costly to maintain, it's costly to build, and it's something that requires regular maintenance. So if you have an area that doesn't really have a gravity outlet and it would need some type of pump station and a force main, then that's an area that wouldn't score as high as somewhere that has trunk sewers or an existing pump station that has capacity and that would be able to service that development. For stormwater, usually there are, I know Aylmer already has stormwater pipes within the community. Those would likely not end up being used by this. Most development now is dealt with through a combination of low impact development, so on-site methods of managing stormwater, as well as stormwater ponds. But we still have to make sure that those can actually be constructed, and you're going to have the right type of grading and layout to do that. So where there are existing servicing constraints, where there's flood hazards, and when there isn't currently any information available or any plans for making sure that anywhere downstream after that water is collected and it's treated in stormwater ponds and it's released at a controlled rate, to making sure that there isn't any type of challenges downstream, all the way up to what would be the best score, which is that there's some type of plan or management strategy for the creeks or the water courses it's going to drain into, that will be able to accommodate this, that you've got positive drainage, and that it can be serviced with relative. So that's our once over. I can switch back to the other previous slides we looked at, because I know that was at least the last 5 or so slides was a pretty heavy data dump. So if you want to flick back to them, I can certainly do that. But I'm wondering, Heather, if we might be able to perhaps start with the online attendees, if anyone has any questions, and then we can go to the crowd there at Town Hall.
Okay, yes, thank you, Eric. So anyone online, you can ask your questions verbally, or you can also submit your questions through the chat feature in Zoom. So we'll just, if you do want to present online, we ask that before you proceed to just state your name. Thank you.
I actually think our only online guest is Mr. or Ms. Hart.
Yes, greetings. No
Good
questions
day.
at the time. Thank you.
Great. And I guess at that, Heather, why don't we turn it over to those who are in person?
Okay, thank you, Eric. Actually, before we do that, I think it's best that I just take a couple minutes to read out the written comments that have been submitted to us in advance of the public meeting. So the first set of written comments that were submitted was from the Township of Malahide. The letter is dated September 26, 2024, regarding the Town of Aylmer Settlement Expansion Lands Assessment Scoring Mechanism. Thank you for the opportunity to review the Aylmer Settlement Area Boundary Expansion Scoring Mechanism, September 5th, 2024, prepared by Stantec. Below are the comments on the criteria proposed within the scoring mechanism. Number 1, Section 1.3 notes that all distances are measured from the centroid of the parcel to the facility or service being assessed. It is recommended that the distance be measured from the parcel boundary rather than the centroid, as parcel size and shape can vary and have an impact on the weighting. The second comment is under Table 2, accessibility roads. It is recommended that consideration also be given to the type of road that the parcel has access to, whether it is a local road, county road, or provincial road. Additionally, it is recommended the weighting be reduced for cases where a property fronts onto 3 and 4 or more roads, as there is no significant benefit of having frontage on more than 2 roads. The third comment, while the proximity to main intersection, community center, education facilities, and emergency services could be considered as criteria, they are, 1, individually weighted greater than several of the land use compatibility factors: agricultural conflict, industrial conflict, environmental conflict. And 2, together are weighted nearly the same as all the engineering criteria. These connectivity distance factors should not be given the level of weighting currently assigned over other more critical land use planning considerations, some of which are specifically identified as factors that ought to be considered when evaluating settlement area boundary expansions. Policy 2.3.2.1 of the Provincial Policy Statement 2024. Similarly, the weighting of connectivity to sidewalks and trail networks are also weighted higher compared to other land use compatibility factors. That would have a greater impact on future development. This weighting may lead to overvaluing candidate parcels or candidate areas that are simply closer to existing community facilities and services, and understating candidate areas that may be more appropriate due to other factors. The fourth comment, it is recommended that the reference of the Canada Land Inventory and Soil Classifications be made for the prime agricultural area criteria, which is consistent with the guidance provided by the provincial policy and OMAFRA guidelines. Additionally, it is recommended that the following criteria be considered to be added to the scoring mechanism. Number 1, consideration for any mineral aggregate resource areas located on the subject lands. This is noted within the assumptions of Section 1.1.3 of the scoring mechanism memo, but there is no criterion included in the scoring mechanism. 2, proximity to the CN rail corridor as a potential constraint for residential development. 3, inclusion of the presence of natural heritage features and areas, provincially significant woodlands, wetlands, and valley lands as potential land use constraint. 4, consideration for parcel characteristics, including parcel size, scoring of one large parcel higher compared to a fragmented collection of smaller parcels, shape, and constraints from topography. And lastly, 5, it is noted that there are lands adjacent to the town of Aylmer that are currently designated in the Township of Malahide official plan as suburban area and highway commercial, which permit industrial, commercial, and some residential uses. It may be beneficial to include criteria that would give weight to lands with these designation over lands that are designated as agriculture in the town's official plan. The township requests that its concerns with the scoring mechanism be published on the Aylmer Settlement Area Boundary Expansion Project page, which is on the Town of Aylmer website, so that the public has access to the feedback that Stantec has received from stakeholders. In the meantime, Township of Malahide looks forward to working with the Town of Aylmer on this project. Thank you. And the second letter that it was submitted on October 2nd, 2024 is from Mike Hutchinson Properties, Inc. We are writing to provide some feedback to the scoring mechanism for the above noted expansion. We are the owners of 48333 Talbot Line, a property we hope to develop for commercial retail use in the near future. Generally, we feel the scoring mechanism is a fair and reasonable approach to determining the best properties for the inclusion into the settlement area, but we do offer the following comments for consideration. 1, accessibility to roads. The scoring mechanism does not differentiate between residential or commercial lands, but they have differing attributes that makes one site more desirable than another. Commercial lands with more than 2 access roads are of no more value as a commercial development site than those that don't. Priority should be given to sites that are on the main commercial roads, being Talbot Street and John Street. Lands on a side street away from the existing commercial uses, even with 4 access street, is not desirable to potential tenants of the commercial development, nor will the site be desired by residents to be located in amongst their homes. Second point, accessibility to education facilities. Similar to the above, commercial lands should not be scored in the same manner as residential lands when it comes to proximity to an educational facility. The desire for nearby schools is geared towards residential owners more so than commercial land owners. Third point, existing official plan designation. There should be a scoring mechanism for properties that have an existing land use designation under the Township of Malahide that matches its proposed use within the Aylmer settlement area boundary. 4, willingness of property owners. While some properties will score higher than others, if the current owner is not willing to develop or sell to developers, then that particular property does not help Aylmer achieve its goal of more homes and more community-serving employment. A scoring mechanism for the willingness of the property owner will help identify properties that should develop over the next 5 to 10 years. That is all the written comments that I have received up to tonight's public engagement session. So if there is no questions for the online people, I would kindly ask that at this time we will move to questions for in-person participants. I would ask that if you wish to speak, that you please come up to the podium one at a time to ask your question. We would ask for you to state your name before proceeding with your question.
Thank you, Heather. Very nervous presenter here or talker here. I had a medical incident back in May. It's not your problem, but I'm taking some medication and it makes me extremely nervous. So if I appear that way, that's the fact, okay? So just want to acknowledge our mayor, deputy mayor, and maybe an administrative person with you tonight, Dominic? Welcome. That's great. So I am a Malahide resident. I live at 263 Cavalier Road. My name is Tom McKenney. I'm here with my good neighbor Louis Martin, and we've been neighbors for probably almost 30 years, residents here for 30 years. We love our community. We love our neighborhood. Happy to be paying our taxes to Malahide. What's the cost of what we've just heard tonight? I know it's not my prerogative to know the number, but to me, it almost seems make work, okay? So I'd ask council to consider that, okay? It's a lot of work there. And I had to think, what about when St. Thomas did the nasty deed with Central Elgin? And how much studying was done when that was done, and look at the repercussions of that. I'm really happy to see Malahide and Aylmer work together closely on things. I really believe that's important to us as a community and to people, that we all get along, and we sometimes we have to agree to get along and move along. I think there's a lot of things that we could just, like was said earlier, have that high-level discussion, sit down at the table and draw those areas on a map, those blobs that were referred to, and I know it's kind of crude, but to say this is where we need to expand and do that. I feel that. I don't know if anybody else here feels this is make work, but I think this is make work. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I believe we in municipal business today, we have too many consultants. We have very well-educated professional people who can do the work, and we should be using them as much as we can, not relying on consultants. My basic question goes to Malahide, not to Aylmer, and I don't expect an answer tonight, but reference was made by your presenter to a high-level discussion. And I say that I'm wondering as a taxpayer of Malahide, why Malahide doesn't fully embrace the growth and take this on ourselves. Why do we need to push the boundaries out? Is there a practical reason? Is there an economic reason? What are the reasons? Is there a net negative disadvantage to Malahide back in a way, and just sort of having what I will call a marshmallow spine and allow this to happen. I don't believe that's the case, but we've got to look seriously at that. And I also think when you look at the maybe the time, energy, consulting expense, all the costs associated with doing this type of thing, is maybe this an opportunity for us as communities to sit down and revisit the possibility of maybe an amalgamation as a simpler way of doing things such as this to accommodate the great growth we're all going to benefit from down the road. So those are my questions, those are my thoughts, and I thank you for the opportunity to share those thoughts. Louis, did you have something that you'd like to add?
And maybe I can just briefly, I mean, a lot of the issues raised aren't, oh, how do you turn it on? Right there? Okay, sorry, maybe I can just briefly assist in answering a few of those, although I know a lot of them aren't really relevant to what we're here for tonight. Certainly, Aylmer is happy to look at the situation where a rising tide floats all boats. We love working with our neighbors. We can do a report on, at the end of this, how much we've spent on consultants. We have been pursuing this. I mean, certainly it started in Aylmer in 2016. And it was aggressively kind of looked at again in 2022 and 2024, and we're going forward now to provide a lot of detail and information that has been requested from Malahide on this process. We're more than happy to sit down at any time with and as our neighbors and have discussions with it. And certainly, I don't know if it's as you suggest, we're two communities that work together on these things to meet of everybody's needs, and in that sense. But tonight, what we're here for is really the scoring mechanism. Those are broader issues, but certainly we appreciate it.
Good evening. My name is Lou Martin. I'm a neighbor of Tom McKenney. I've been a resident here for over 26 years. I used to own the former Canadian Tire store. So we have had some dealings with land appropriation and how we pick candidate properties. So my question is, I can't speak on behalf of the people here, but I'm, for one, haven't heard about this. And that's a concern, because my questions relate to the overview rather than the scoring mechanism. That how did this start with? Is there infilling possible within the town boundary in Aylmer? Don't know. There was the industrial park, which I was a part of many years ago, and there's still some lands available, as far as I know, that could still be used for either industrial, light industrial. That's a possibility. So before we start pushing the boundary into Malahide, have we looked at all possibilities of using existing land in the town of Aylmer? Thank you.
Sure, I'll try again. We'll save the planners tonight. But certainly, again, good questions, not directly related to the scoring mechanism, but I'll try my best. One of the issues that we have is when you're planning to the 25 to 30-year time frame, you have to consider the future. So we see subdivisions around here where there's only a couple houses, and we know there's going to be 100 more before it's done. That's 10 years, that's 7 years. If we don't start planning for the 25 to 30-year thing, we're not going to have the engineering, we're not going to have the finances, we're not going to have in place, and we will hit a wall of growth that will have, severe negative impacts for both communities. So a lot of this is, we do see that this area is in a housing crisis. Ontario is in a housing crisis, and we can't not address housing now and ensure that the community has the same standard of affordability and rent. The action needs to be happen now to plan for what's going to happen in 25 years. So it isn't a situation where we can turn our back on growth, I would suggest.
My name's Tracy Tucker. I'm with Doug Terry Limited, so Echoing some of the comments we heard from Malahide, I don't think it's shocked anyone, we own some land in Malahide. And putting the, distance from the centroid would obviously really negative impact us. We have frontage on multiple roads. We have two very significant, large parcels right on the outside of town, could be merged together. They may already be, I don't know, I'd have to check that. So that's kind of, from our perspective, yes, we would prefer that with Malahide. And then that with the connectivity, a lot of that can be solved through the site. There is stub roads to our site. We have frontage on multiple roads. And also having the engineering side of things weighted higher, because that can cause significant impacts, where some of the other constraints and the connectivity stuff probably is not as important because it can be solved throughout the site, where engineering it needs to be there to actually move forward with the plans.
Is there any further questions? Just looking. Is there anyone who's already asked a question would like to ask another question? Oh, yeah, come on.
So my question really is, have we looked at any land parcels within the township of Aylmer before we look at Malahide?
That's a great question. Yes, we are currently, as you can see, we're pretty busy here in town. We have multiple developments going on John Street South. I have a map that has been provided to me by our Director of Infrastructure with maybe Owen's assistance. We'll put it up on the screen. It's a map showing kind of what we are currently working on right now in the town of Aylmer, how many units they are. These are what I call our infill projects. So we are working quite diligently on trying to fill up parcels of land that are either what we call greenfield spaces or brownfields. We've had a couple of really great successful brownfield sites here in Aylmer that had former industrial uses that we've been able to clean up, and there is proposed residential development happening on them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we looked at properties like the old Coronation plant on John Street.
The thing with developing these parcels, these are privately owned parcels, so it's all based on interest of the owner. But what I can say is I've been here with the town for a little over 2 years. I've seen a significant amount of interest in trying to redevelop existing parcels we have in town and infill opportunities. We're also seeing a lot of requests for people wanting to put in second and third units in existing single-family homes, as well as semi-detached homes. So we are seeing an increased need for additional housing units within the town of Aylmer.
Okay. Thank you.
I was just going to say, too, I have a map that we can put up on the screen just to kind of show you current projects that we're working on. Okay, so what we have here is a map that the town of Aylmer has prepared, and this is all this information that's being shared tonight. It's going to be uploaded to the town of Aylmer's boundary settlement area expansion project page on our website. So you can find this information. The goal is to have it up there by tomorrow. So this will be up there as well. So what you'll see here is a map, basically showing kind of the boundaries of the town of Aylmer. So parcels we have highlighted in red are what we call our shovel-ready. So these are our approved residential developments that have gone through all the necessary planning approvals. So as you can see, there is a property up kind of what we call kind of to the northwest side. That is what we call the Willow Run subdivision, and that is already currently being built out. If you drive down Willow Drive, you'll see that the developer is currently working quite aggressively at building out that development. Next up, we have a parcel called 78 Spruce Street. It is 31 townhouse units. This is one of these properties I mentioned that's a brownfield site. This was the former Walker Transport site that had industrial uses. The owner of the property has gone through all the necessary environmental studies and cleaning of the lands, has a record of site condition that's been filed with the Minister of Environment. It is now, the developer is going to be fairly soon looking at constructing townhouse units on that. So that's what we'd call a success as a planner, taking a brownfield site, reusing it for residential development, and actually a different form of development beyond single-family housing. Moving on, we have what we call the Cottonwood Hills subdivision. We have phases 2 and 3, and that is highlighted in red. And that's phase 2 is currently being built out right now in that area of town, just off of Dingle Street. Currently, single detached homes. Phase 3 has received draft plan approval for a red line revision, and it will have a mixture of semi-detached dwelling units as well as single-family dwellings. Moving on to 249, and Cottonwood Hills Phase 4. So that is an area we've outlined in yellow, and that is what we're calling the anticipated residential development and planning approval phase. That is an area that the developer has expressed interest in. However, we haven't received any planning applications for that area. Moving on to 249 John Street House. If you drive down John Street South, this was the former laundromat, pantry mart, convenience store property. Again, this parcel is also a brownfield site due to the previous uses on the property. The property owner has gone through all the necessary environmental studies, cleaning the soils, as well as filing the record of site condition with the Ministry of Environment. If you drive past that site right now, it's currently under construction for townhouse development. Moving on to Centennial Estates subdivision, phase 2. This is 33 single detached lots. This is a subdivision that has been registered for well over 20 years. It's a proper parcel that actually just sat vacant. The developer didn't do anything with it, didn't build on it for quite some time. There's new purchasers on the property. They've expressed a lot of interest. They've started putting roads. They put the servicing in. And they're looking at building out in that development very shortly. And that is off of part of the Alexander Drive, Rebecca Drive area. Moving on to 335 John Street South. This is the parcel that's kind of just south of the fire hall. It's tucked in behind some parcels that front onto John Street South, almost across from Studer's Variety Store. It has 17 semi-detached, 34 total units being constructed there at this time. Moving on to 431 John Street South. This is a townhouse development. As I mentioned, it's been approved for residential developments. It's been approved for 76 townhouse units. Currently at this time, there is no development happening on the property. So also what you'll see on here as well, you will also see in blue, that is the Aylmer Lagoons, and they are been approved for an optimization project commencing in 2025. So this kind of just provides kind of an overall view of what is currently happening in the town of Aylmer in terms of infilling within our existing settlement and corporate boundaries. Excuse me. So if there is no more further questions, on behalf of the town of Aylmer as well as Stantec, I'd like to thank you for coming out tonight. and taking the time this evening to participate in the first public engagement session for the Town of Aylmer Settlement Area Boundary Expansion. I just would like to ask you just to please remember, if you haven't signed in, to please sign in on the registry so that we can ensure that you receive any future communications on this project. And we'd like you to have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's a pleasure having a chance to speak with all of you. And just following up on Heather's comment, if you have other comments, if you have other thoughts that come to you after the meeting that you'd like to share, please do share those with us. We appreciate that feedback.
Ones we can talk about now. I'd like to mention the ones that aren't on the books yet. I think the issue with the carnation site, isn't it that that's owned by Loblaws? Keep things running. Yeah, we can't say that, but it's just, they won't sell their land.